He is a senior writer for ESPN's The Undefeated, and he is the host of the latest ESPN 30 for 30 podcast, The King of Crenshaw, which focused on the life of Nipsey Hussle, death and legacy, which deeply impacted the sports world, but specifically the NBA. We welcome Justin Tinsley onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Justin?
Thank you guys for having me on, man. I can't wait to chop it up with y'all about this.
So, Justin, this was just an incredible podcast. I recommend everybody go check it out. I believe a lot of basketball fans, they get stuck in their silos, right? It's like, I'm going to root for my own team and just forget about everything else. But I think it's important just to understand the NBA as like a culture, just to really check out this podcast, because I believe it provides deep insight into these players off the court. So, Justin, my first question to you is, how did you become involved with this project? Because with the 30 for 30 podcast series, I believe this one in particular, it's so different than the others, just the way it's produced, the athletes involved, just everything. So how did you become motivated to create this project?
Man, that's a really good question. And I'll try to keep my answer not an elevator pitch worthy answer, but I'll try to keep it somewhere in that cul-de-sac of time. So obviously you listen to the podcast, and for anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast, I kind of get into that a little bit in the first episode, where I have one of my really good friends. He's featured in the first episode, Brian Robinson, and he's from the South LA area, South Central, whatever you want to call it. But he's from that area, and we went to college together. And he's the one that ultimately put me on the Nipsey Hussle's music. And this had to be 2005, 2006, somewhere around like the mid 2000s. And so fast forward, I would say about 11 years. So I was just getting off the train at Union Station in Washington, D.C., and Brian called me. And this was around April 2018. And he was like, yo, man, would you be interested in potentially doing a story on Nipsey for ESPN? Because he's a huge ESPN fan. He's a huge NBA fan. And we're just trying to look for ways to, further promote his album Victory Lap, which at that point was about 2 or 3 months old. And one of his really good friends, her name is Brittany Bell, who I could spend the rest of the show just praising her alone. Like her ear for music is so great. And Brian linked us. And so we basically came up with an idea and this is a loose idea. I don't want to make it seem like Nipsey and I were like this close to working on the project together, but we came up with an idea that was around like, hey, I would love to examine Nipsey's relationship with, certain guys in the league, because it feels like there's a deeper story behind just, oh, let's pose for a picture and post it on Instagram before or after the game. And apparently he liked the idea, and we both wanted to get it on video, but he was really busy in 2018. I wasn't exactly, just twiddling my thumbs either. And as I say in the podcast, man, the thing about time, you always think you have more of it. So all throughout 2018, I'm like, man, we'll get to it. Like he's living life right now. He's just got nominated for a Grammy. Like he's at the apex of his career. So in 2019, we'll make it work. And unfortunately, he lost his life in March of 2019. But I knew that in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't want to let this idea just collect dust on the shelf, because obviously Nipsey preached the concept of the marathon to, keep things going even in the midst of like setbacks or loss. And I pitched the idea to my former boss, Kevin Merida, who's now over at the LA Times. And he really liked the idea, and he connected me with the people at 30 for 30. And I knew, as you said, Justin, I knew this was going to be something different for them, just in terms of topic matter, just in terms of like the culture that was going to go that was going to go into telling this story. And I went through the script writing process. This was my first time ever writing a script for anything. I've never done more revisions or rewriting than anything when I did a script. So long story short, I'm here talking to you all about the podcast right now, but I couldn't let it collect dust on the shelf after he passed away, because I didn't think that would be a fitting tribute to him and everything that he preached in his life.
Justin, can you go into the hip hop, excuse me, the relationship? I have hip hop on my mind.
Yeah.
The relationship between hip hop and the NBA specifically, because I feel like with other sports, they don't really share a kinship with music, but basketball has with hip hop, and you go into depth with that and into the podcast. Can you kind of go
Yeah.
into why that relationship is so important to the game nowadays?
I mean, at this point, they're inseparable.
Yeah.
And they have been for a long time, but definitely in 2021, they're inseparable. Like when you think of hip hop culture, you think of the NBA's influence on hip hop, and when you think of NBA culture, you think of hip hop's influence on that. And it's not anything that just started over the last 5 or 6 years or anything like that. You can go back to the 90s, and Shaquille O'Neal and the Notorious B.I.G. were really, really good friends. So these worlds have always revolved around each other because, as I say in the podcast, they were kind of cultivated within the same type of environment. The same where hip hop was born. On those same blacktops was where guys were playing basketball. And so they live, and there's a competition element in both that you see in hip hop that you really don't see in other genres of music. And sometimes that's a beautiful thing, and sometimes that's a negative thing. But there's this competition that goes into both. And once you continue to elevate throughout each world, whether it's basketball, whether it's hip hop, they're always keeping, they're keeping tabs on each other. You find motivation through many avenues in life. It just happens to be that rap and basketball, they grew up on the same, they sprouted out of the same concrete, and a lot of times they're shared life experiences between these artists and these basketball players that, you honestly can't fake it. You honestly can't make this stuff up. And it's one of those things, like my grandmother always has a saying, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. Like, so there's no way you can rewind it and take hip hop out of basketball or take basketball out of hip hop.
Justin, I want to ask you this question about Nipsey in particular, because we've seen Master P, we've seen some of these rap artists, want to dip their foot into the pool of basketball. Was there any thoughts of Nipsey actually wanting to try out his hoop dreams at all due to the connections he had in the NBA? Was there any kind of inkling that he went, hey, I want to try a summer league, or I want to try out an exhibition game or something? Did you hear any of that through the grapevine through your research?
No, I mean, no, I didn't hear that. But of course I asked about all that type of stuff. And I'm so glad that you asked that question. One of the main voices that we have on the podcast, and I'm so blessed to have him on there, was Nipsey's older brother, Samil Askadam, aka Black Sam. And this story didn't make the podcast. I really, really wanted it to make the podcast. Like, if it was up to me, each episode would have been 2 hours long. But they were like, no, Justin, you got to, siphon some of this down. But he tells this really great story of just how Nipsey was always a perfectionist. He was a scientist in a lot of ways. So, if he committed to something, he committed 100%. He was never 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And that's with anything he did. So with basketball, one of those marquee moments in his life was Iverson's crossover on Jordan. And so even living in LA, he's so far away from Philly. Obviously he's not near Chicago, but those figures of Allen Iverson and Michael Jordan to, I believe, at an 11-year-old Nipsey Hussle at this point in March of 1997 when that happened, that was transformational, because Sam tells a story of how Nipsey saw the crossover and the next day was at the court working on the crossover, almost obsessing over it, to the point where he was hitting everybody with the crossover at the park. And Sam, he told this great story of how Nipsey almost got him and almost got him to fall. And he was like, all right, no, I'm never playing my brother again. I'm never playing my brother again, because I can't give him that grace of saying oh, I hit you with the Iverson crossover and you fell. And he also talks about Nipsey's, let's just say, when he was younger, at least, let's just say he wasn't he was a sore loser, I guess you could say. It was yeah, you knew when you played Hustle growing up that if you lost, you can't celebrate too much, because Hustle will be the one to kick the ball over the fence. And he was like, now we can't play for the next 2 or 3 days because we got to get a new ball. So basketball, I mean, growing up in South Central LA, you're going to walk by basketball courts. Basketball is just going to be a part of your life whether you wanted to or not, Nipsey just happened to gravitate towards the game. And it always stayed with him throughout the course of his life. But he was never one of those guys like, oh, I think I can go to Vegas Summer League and like try out for the Lakers or something like that. Like he respected the game, but he respected it enough to be like, I know I can't run with these guys. But it's that respect for the game that also drew him in with all of these guys, the Isaiah Thomases, the DeMar DeRozans, the James Hardens, the Russell Westbrooks, LeBron. Like they respected him for having so much respect for their game, and he respected them for having so much respect for the game that he was in, which was ultimately hip hop. So there was mutual respect there. But no, Nipsey never had inklings of running with Russell Westbrook and LeBron James and Anthony Davis on the Lakers. I think he would have been just fine sitting courtside, though.
You talk about the intertwined relationship between the NBA and hip hop, and I kind of wanted to zoom in on Nipsey Hussle in particular. Was there, beyond maybe geographic ties, of course, with South LA, is there anything in particular about Nipsey's music and his rap that stood out to NBA players and kind of maybe heightened that bond between hip hop and NBA?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. Now, I'll try to answer it in a couple of ways. If you listen to his music, there's this constant theme of what he calls the marathon. Like anything that I want is not going to come to me overnight. I have to work for it. I have to make myself deserving of the blessings that will rain upon me, hopefully, that I can embrace. And so if you listen to the podcast and you know anything about Nipsey Hussle, his career was anything but overnight. There were tons of times where he had to basically take his career into his own hands when nobody outside of his core circle believed in what he was doing and just basically invest in himself. And so you translate that over to basketball players. Yeah, we see them on TV. We see the playoffs. We see these big moments of guys like KD hitting a buzzer beater, or Giannis going for like 50, 14, and 9 in Game 6 of the finals. And that's great, and it's beautiful to watch. But there's so many times where they're in a gym with nobody in there. There's no cameras, and they're working on their right hand, or they're working on pull-up jump shot. Like all of those things, they kind of like mirror going into the studio trying to write lyrics, trying the right thing to say at the right part of the song, or the right drum kick to have at this part of the song to further enhance of what you're trying to say. So again, there was that mutual respect of hard work and being proud of the work that you put in. And when you listen to his music, there was something about there was a very honest element to his music. Like if you listen to his music, and Nipsey always said himself, you listen to my music, call me out on anything you want. I guarantee you that I either lived it or I experienced it or somebody close to me went through that. I'm not saying that that's a 24/7 badge of honor. I'm saying that I still deal with the grief that comes with some of that, but you can't call me out on anything in my music. And I think that authenticity of just being like this young black man who's so confident in himself, but also confident in his mistakes. Not that he's proud of his mistakes, but also understanding that this is how I grew from this mistake. This is how I elevated. This is how I refined myself. And if you're a young black man, especially in America, especially coming up during the last 15 or 20 so years that we've experienced, those shared life experiences resonate deeper than any stat line, resonate deeper than any mixtape or any album. It's like you see part of yourself in him. And he saw part of himself in them. And once you have that relationship, man, it's hard as hell to break.
Justin, I want to focus on Russell Westbrook's 2020 game. And it's something that I don't think is appreciated enough. It's one thing to do a tribute, and for instance, a lot's brought up with Brett Favre, I think with his grandfather passing away, and he played well after that game. But, it's one thing you go off for like 30, 40 points, but for 2020, that is just an incredible stat. What shocked you from your research, from discovering not only Westbrook's motivation, but also just him pulling that off? That's not something that's easily achieved on the basketball court. And do you think that's something that's not really respected among basketball circles just because it is Westbrook, who is a polarizing figure within the basketball community?
I think within the basketball community and just people just who love basketball and understand that, like, what goes on the court is only half of the story. And I think I'm pretty sure. I feel confident in saying within basketball circles, I think it is appreciated enough. Now, granted, in the larger realm of society and pop culture, maybe not. But that was we've all seen Russell Westbrook get triple doubles. Like he is Mr. Triple Double. Like he's gotten every type of triple double you could possibly imagine. But that was special, man, because he and Nipsey were, and I wish we could have got Westbrook, personally for this podcast because there's so many things I would have loved to ask him about that. But also, that's a very real pain for him. Speaking on this, and I can't tell anybody when to speak about someone that they truly, truly love and they're not here anymore. Like, because grief, man, there is no expiration date on grief. And so, I wish we could have got him, but I completely understand why we didn't. Timing also didn't work out as well. A pandemic doesn't help either. But I would imagine that some of it came from like, I don't know if he's really ready to speak on Nipsey in depth. I wish we could have, because I would have loved to ask him about that game. I can't imagine the type of grief that was, the trauma that he was going through before that game. Like, Nipsey, he saw Nipsey a couple of weeks before he passed. And Westbrook was somebody that Nipsey was always championing. Like he saw like the intensity that Russ put into his game. He saw he was basically the same way when it came to like his music, but they were also deeply invested into the communities that they were from. So he saw a lot of himself in Russell Westbrook. And I believe that, Russell Westbrook, he said it after the game, he deeply, deeply looked up to Nipsey Hussle. Like he was somebody to be proud of. Coming from shared life experiences, coming from South LA, like there's already so many stereotypes that go into being a young black male from that area, and in Nipsey Hussle, that was somebody that Russell Westbrook could plant a flag with, like, this is my guy. I want to be like him. I understand the moves that he's making. I understand the dedication that he has to his neighborhood and his area, and this is something that I want to portray to the world. So the fact that he had all of this going through his mind, and then to pull off a triple double that up to that point had only been done one time in history, and that was by Wilt Chamberlain, which was half a century ago. And of course, once you understand the 2020, and that's a subtle reference to the gang that Nipsey was a part of, the Rolling 60s Crips. I don't. When you mention tributes, like on the field, on the court tributes. Yeah, Brett Favre. I believe that was his dad who passed. I remember watching that game.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think they were playing the Raiders, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. That was a crazy game to watch live. But if I have to think of a tribute game, man, like especially so soon after it happened, I think Russ's 2020 game would be mine, because I don't think Russ hunts triple doubles as much as people say he does. But I have to think that night, once he realized, he probably said, oh man, I have 17, 15, and 16. Like, let me try to go get this. And I thought it was, I'm personally a fan of the tribute. And it's my personal favorite sports tribute of all time.
Justin, you mentioned grief, and I want to tap into that because you go into detail about Nipsey Hussle's funeral, and there's this gut-wrenching just to listen to all the details and your description there. And I just want to get your opinion of what is the LA community as a whole feeling now, not only with Nipsey Hussle's death, but with Kobe Bryant's death, and then with the pandemic and with the Lakers winning the title. What is the vibe within that community as a whole, do you think?
I mean, LA is always going to be very resilient. This is a city that if you're from there, I know a lot of people from there. I lived there for a year. I won't claim that I'm from LA. I'm not. I have a deep, deep love in my heart for LA. But if you know anybody from that city, they are deeply, deeply proud of their city, even with, whatever things that may be wrong with it. Like they're deeply territorial in terms of like repping for their city and putting on for their city. But as you would imagine, like it was back to back to back, like losing Nipsey and then losing Kobe and then having the entire world shut down for the pandemic. And yes, of course, the Dodgers winning the World Series was great. The Lakers winning the World Series was great. But, those three things, the losing Nipsey, losing Kobe, and then the pandemic, like that's a trifecta that you don't wish on anybody or any city, because it's so hard to come back from that. Like losing Nipsey and losing Kobe, yes, the city of LA will move on because that's just how life works, but that city will never be the same without them. You know, they're when you think of culture and you think of Los Angeles, those are two gaping holes that can never be filled again. And it's not saying that like LA can't ever be on top or anything like that, but I think LA will always hold and cherish those two individuals, because when you think of LA, in so many ways they represented what LA was. You know, LA was always seen as like this city. Oh, it's Hollywood. It's prim. You know what I mean? Bougie, X, Y, and Z. Yes, that does go on, but there's a lot of blue collar workers in that city. People just trying to make an honest living out of their lives, and they come from a certain neighborhood where you can't go to this neighborhood if you live in that neighborhood. And it's just, these guys represented so much of what everyday life in LA was like, that they'll never, LA will never replace those two. But the thing about it is that they're not trying to replace those two, because they'll always be able to hold who Nipsey Hussle was and who Kobe Bryant was near and dear to their heart. Yes, March 31st and January 26th every year are always going to be like extremely, extremely hard for that city. But they also have a ton of memories that they can hold on to forever. And that's the thing, man. Life experiences eventually turn to memories. Every experience is eventually going to become a memory. So you try to hold as many great experiences that you had with that person in that time of your life. And that's what you'll always remember. We'll always be talking about, oh man, you remember Kobe in the '08 Olympics when he put the team on his back? Or you're like, oh man, you remember when Nipsey was on the red carpet with his daughter and his partner Lauren London, how great they look. Like, oh man, Nipsey was going to become this. It's going to be tough, but even throughout that pain, like the pain can never overshadow the love that city has for those two gentlemen in particular.
Well said, Justin. And I think too, just with both of those guys, what makes it feel even more tragic is, of course, you have the question of like, what if, or what could have been, that makes this such a hard blow. I wanted to ask specifically about Nipsey's activism in the LA community. I mean, it seems like from what I've read, from what I've looked at, he was very much about uniting the community together. Yeah. Can you speak to kind of what his focus was in the LA area and what kind of lives on from that?
Man, like you can't mention Los Angeles, in particular South Los Angeles, ever again without mentioning Nipsey Hussle. And in the podcast, we kind of explore this too. Not kind of, we do explore this, where yes, music is such a huge part of who he was and what his legacy is, but that's only a piece of the pie. Like I believe Garrett Kennedy says it in there, because I don't want to take credit for this quote, because it's one of my favorite quotes from the entire podcast. It's like, Nipsey did what we all say we really want to do, but he actually did it. When people find success, when people come upon money in their life, sometimes they move away. They move to a different neighborhood and they funnel money back. And if they do funnel money back into the neighborhood in certain ways. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, because I understand the different motivations for doing that. But what Nipsey did was he found success. And yes, he enjoyed the spoils of that success, but he pumped not even just money. He pumped financial resources. He pumped jobs into those communities and gave people jobs who lived in his neighborhood, whereas society, they would have just tossed him aside. Like, oh, this guy's getting, he's an ex-con. Like, nobody wants to hire him. Well, Nipsey would hire them at his store, or Nipsey would hire them at a barbershop to do this. Like, he did the thing that we say we were always going to do. And he was very visible in his community. He literally tattooed Slauson Boy on his back. Like, he literally carried his neighborhood with him everywhere he went. And people saw that. People saw that, like, okay, I see how your clothing store in the shopping center is continuing to evolve over time. And he could have taken the Marathon store anywhere. He could have opened it in Calabasas. He could have opened it in Beverly Hills, on you know, anywhere in more quote unquote affluent parts of LA. But he was like, no, if you want my material, and I know you want my material, you have to come to my neighborhood to get it. And that what that did from a confidence standpoint for his neighborhood, and also from an economic perspective, you can't even really quantify that. And so, man, it's Sam said it himself. Black Sam said it himself. Like, he deserved a Nobel Peace Prize for what he was trying to do, and ultimately where he wanted to take his life. Yes, he wanted to become, you know, a huge star within music, but he also wanted to be the guy when people looked at South LA, when people saw all the negative things about that area, he wanted to be like, no, I'm from that area, and we got a lot of great things going on in this community, and I won't be the sole reason, but I will be one of the reasons why we pulled this neighborhood up from the stereotype that has been under for so many generations. And my neighborhood will stay my neighborhood. I'm not going to let you move people out of my neighborhood just to build up, you know, condos and high rises. Like, this is my neighborhood, and this is what we're doing with it. Like, he was in city council meetings. It wasn't just him sending a representative. No, he sat in city council meetings saying, okay, so how does this work? How does that work? He was very studious in everything that he did. And he was very intentional in everything that he did. And that absolutely played a role into how he represented his community, but also, even more importantly, how his community embraced him.
Justin, I want to ask you about other hip hop stars and their affiliation with their favorite teams, just because I feel like you're mentioning the Activision with Nipsey. And I believe a lot of the players that were friends with Nipsey respected that because he was ingrained in the community. But I wanted to ask you, instead of me making an assumption, because we see Drake at the games and we see him just hanging out with Steph, but we don't know the behind the scenes. And I'm just curious if you've heard about other hip hop stars. You know, there's Drake, Wale, Rick Ross, others who are very much fans of the NBA. Do you know if they have a similar kind of kinship with the players within the league, or do you think it's mostly surface level? What have you discovered just in your articles you've written or just researched for this project?
Yeah, obviously not trying to make an assumption for, other artists and the background of their friendships with guys in the league. Now, Drake, he's cool with a lot of people in the league, and and because he's Drake, he's one of the biggest artists in the world, and he constantly refers to the NBA and the NBA players in his songs, which is a form of cultural currency that you really can't mimic. I think the only other one that may be higher than that is like Jay-Z. Like, oh man, I got referenced in the Jay-Z song. But in terms of like their relationships, I know Ross is cool with quite a few guys in the league. I know Ross does a lot of stuff in terms of like entrepreneurial endeavors that really that inspire guys across the league. I know Ross is really cool with Dwayne Wade. They go back very far. Obviously, Dwayne spent the bulk of his career in Miami, and of course, Rick Ross is from Miami. So they were bound to cross paths at some point. But I know they're really cool. DeMar DeRozan was telling me how he and Kendrick Lamar, both being from Compton, they're really close, and how he uses Kendrick's music as motivation the same way that he did with Nipsey. Trying to think, like 2 Chainz has a lot of friends in the league because 2 Chainz used to play basketball himself. But the extent of these friendships, I'm sure there's backstories to them. I'm sure they have, inspiring and oftentimes hilarious stories of how their friendships came to be. But for this one in particular, I was really obviously focusing on Nipsey because I wanted to see what the extent of that was. But it honestly be kind of cool to make a series out of it, just to see where the tentacles of these friendships and bonds actually take you. So you might just give me an idea for a series, I guess.
Yeah, we are always looking to get kind of behind the curtain, right?
For sure. We always want to know that. We always want to know that.
On that point, I wanted to ask, one, what has been the reception to the podcast being released so far? And do you see, future 30 for 30 project for yourself, ideas you have? And not only that, delving more into the, hip hop culture side of things, because I believe a series on Allen Iverson, he's I would say one of the biggest icons in all of
Yeah.
basketball. That has something that hasn't been really delved into other than like his life, but
Yeah.
not in terms of how he's affected the rest of the game globally. So, with those questions, what's your response to those?
I'll answer them part by part. One, the feedback that I've seen, granted, outside of the random user on Twitter where it's like Joe and like 16 numbers behind it, and it's like a dog Abby with like 2 followers. I mean, every now and then you get one of those, but
Yeah.
honestly, from actual real life people and just outlets that I respect, I've been floored by the reception because in my head I knew it was a good topic. I figured people would at least be interested in clicking play. I'm like, all right, let me see what this is about. But I did not see just it's like a tidal wave of like compliments that I've seen. I'm just like, man, and it's just a lot of which from people who I've never met before in my life, and it's just like, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I didn't know what to expect, click and play, but you did a phenomenal job, honoring his legacy and telling his story, and that means a lot to me. More than I don't know what this podcast will ultimately do. What will it be nominated for an award? I don't know. Will it win an award? Hell, I really don't know that. But that was never my intention from the moment I wrote that first script. My intention was like, tell this story, see this thing through. And once it's out in the universe, it's beyond my control, and it'll do what it ultimately needs to do. So the feedback has been great so far. And, I'll be sharing it throughout the rest of the year and into 2022. And, I just hope it reaches as many people as possible. In terms of future projects, I mean, you just mentioned one of them. I would love to do a story on Allen Iverson, not just a story, but like a series on Allen Iverson's cultural just impact, not just on basketball, but just in like ways of life. I'll never forget when Allen Iverson started wearing the arm sleeve. I remember one of these guys in my high school. He walked into class one day, and it was like a cut up tube sock on his arm. And it was like I'm like, what are you doing? He was like, man, hey, I did it last night. I'm like, you do know that's because he hurt his elbow, right? And he's like, oh, no, I just thought it looked cool. And like, that's the thing about Allen Iverson, man. He's such a counterculture hero in a lot of ways that even as he gets older, he becomes even more endearing because nobody is as authentic as that guy, So I would love that. Future 30 for 30s. I will say this about the 30 for 30 team. Like, you got to really impress them with an idea. Like, because they get pitched so many like topics. Like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. Some of which are extremely, extremely great ideas. It's just don't have the bandwidth to do every great idea. So, I've got a running Google Doc of ideas, and, I try to flesh them out as much as I can, but God willing, I would love to do another one, I would love to make that like a calling card if I could, of my career, just telling these really deep, rich cultural stories that deserve platforms and audiences like a 30 for 30. So hopefully I can keep going.
I hope so too, because your latest edition of the 30 for 30 podcast series was excellent. Again, not just trying to give you a cheap plug. This is a must listen for NBA fans out there. Excellent piece of content. Thank
you so much, man. And I appreciate you. I appreciate Matt, and I appreciate everybody who's just like, taking the time to click play, because I mean, we're all busy in our own rights. You know what I mean? And just the fact that like y'all carved out, I don't know how long the podcast, maybe what, like 2.5 hours. Y'all carved out 2.5 hours of your time to listen to something that, myself and my great team. I do want to shout out the team. Joanne Griffith, this was my first time ever working with her, but I hope it's not my last, put it that way. She was just a blessing, and she made this entire experience for me in terms of just putting a podcast together and the discipline that comes with putting a podcast together of this magnitude. Like, she helped me every step of the way, and she was just incredible. My man, Gus Navarro, Derwin Graham, Julia Henderson, Steve Reese, Meredith Hodnott. So many people are responsible for this podcast, being out in the world. That, I mean, I know it may have been my initial idea. I know I'm the narrator, the host, the voice of whatever you want to call it. But I'm just one piece of a big puzzle that helped make this thing a reality. It's a dream come true for me. It's honestly a dream come true because I've always been a fan of great storytelling. And of course, 30 for 30 just for so many years has been synonymous with great storytelling. So to know that, when we look back on 30 for 30, 20 some odd years from now, hopefully they're still doing them. But when we look back on it like 20 years from now, people can be like, one that I really, really enjoyed was the Nipsey Hussle podcast. And I hope I can speak that into the universe and speak that into reality. So,
Justin, please let our viewers and listeners know where they can find you on social media. And then I know you're working on a new book about Notorious B.I.G. and any other projects that's coming up on the line for you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. It's actually kind of easy. Both ats are the same. They're at Justin Tinsley, JustinTinsley. And thank you so much for mentioning that. I do have my first full-length biography that I've written. It's called It Was All a Dream, Biggie and the World That Made Him. And that's, of course, a biography on the late, great, Notorious B.I.G., a.k.a. Biggie Smalls, real name Christopher George Latore Wallace. And I just hope that book, for younger, not just younger, but a generation of hip hop fans who weren't, really in their late teens or their 20s when Biggie was around and at the peak of his powers. I hope this presents Christopher Wallace, in a light that maybe they weren't familiar with. And obviously it's not a bad thing because I just report on his life, but there's so many things about Biggie Smalls that had nothing to do with Biggie Smalls that I hope comes off, jumps off the page for people here. And, I'm just really proud of it. It comes out through Abrams Books, May 2022. We just dropped a pre-order link. So if you go to any of my social media, you'll be able to find the pre-order link there. And just check it out. And I hope you enjoy it the same way I hope you enjoyed this podcast.
Great, Justin. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy Monday to chat with us. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you guys again. Thank you so much.